This is ICASTnews.com, live and direct from United Nations headquarters in New York City. And this is heat in the Middle East. The Middle East is being cooled by the vapor trails of the nearly 750,000 people fleeing Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Eritrea, and being heated by the words of the leaders of Russia, the words of the press spokesman and some of the leaders in Washington about each other, and being heated by the heat-absorbing steel of new weapons being delivered in the Middle East. The Russians, we have learned, have just signed a deal to deliver more Sukhoi 30 fighters to Algeria. Why we're hearing this is because there's just been an arms show outside Moscow. The Russians want to say in the Middle East, we're back. Additionally, the Russians are delivering more and newer BTR-82s. That's armored personnel carriers, the things that look like tanks without turrets that drive people around. Prefabricated housing is arriving in the Syrian Air Force base areas. Perhaps the Russians are going to take advantage of a 1980 friendship treaty that gives them the opportunity to make the Latia Air Base their own. We know that more Russian ships with more military and humanitarian goods have gone through the Bosphorus at this point this year than all the ships that went last year. Mr. Putin is talking about creating a coalition to fight ISIL inside of Syria and Iraq. He says that perhaps the American airstrikes are not very effective because the ground control and the intelligence isn't that good, and perhaps the Russians can help out. He's also hinting that the Russians have a plan, or at least are beginning to position themselves in ways to be the leaders of solving some of Syria's problems. This week he said, "How can we make any progress in regions controlled by the Islamic State? It's impossible. People are fleeing those regions. They kill hundreds of thousands, blow up cultural monuments, burn people alive or drown them, cut off the heads of living people. How can one live there? Of course people are fleeing." Of course, his claim is that only people are fleeing from ISIL or ISIS, not from his ally, President Assad, when in fact it's quite clear from the reports from independent observers on the ground that many, especially Syrian Sunnis, are fleeing as Assad controls less territory, is lashing out more and more against other groups. If you look carefully at the pictures and listen to what's being said by the Syrians account for some 53% of the refugees streaming into Western Europe, you see these are not poor people. You can hear when they speak in English or in French or in German that we're dealing with the educated middle and upper middle class. That professionals are finally saying they've had enough. Almost 5 or 6 million people have streamed out of Syria. And until recently, it's been the neighboring regions that have borne the brunt of this. Countries that are wealthy, that are rich, that have some say in what goes on. Say Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia which provided many of the people who perpetrated the attacks on 9/11, is taking in very few refugees. They're willing to build mosques in Germany. They're not willing to do their share, as many countries are not willing to do their share in absorbing the people who are fleeing out of the Middle East. And this refugee or migrant or displaced person problem is not going away. Neither is the controversy of what the Russians are doing, putting more arms into Syria. But all the noise coming out of the West about Russian interference is little more than hypocritical. Western policy towards solving the problems in Syria has been a series of failures. The Kremlin is taking advantage of the weakness in NATO and American actions in Syria to position itself to be the rescuer of the world as an arbiter of what goes on in Syria. No, they do not want to see their ally, Mr. Assad and his regime, go away. They don't like change. They like constancy. But they're doing something that's constantly important to the Russian ego, saying that they are a big deal, big players on the world stage, and we should expect Vladimir Putin to make a major statement or a major move, just as he comes to United Nations headquarters in New York City for the General Assembly. For Heat in the Middle East, for ICAStnews.com, always live and direct from United Nations headquarters in New York City, I'm Jonathan Sanders.